Welcome, everybody. It's a delight to have many colleagues here today for Challenge 2, thinking about this second workshop, which is focusing on portfolio education and how higher education institutions might see an opportunity to take a different approach. Some brilliant remarks there from two opening keynotes, really fascinating to have their perspective. My name is Dr. Kate DAUBNEY. I am the director of the Careers Group, which is the federation of careers services of a number of the colleges and universities within the University of London, including SOAS, University College London and Goldsmiths, some names that you may know quite well. We have an ever-increasing diversity of students in our community, a combined student population of around 200,000. And that's inevitably going to lead to some greater diversity in their expectations and what they're looking for from higher education. One of my responsibilities at the University of London will be this year to set up a new centre of excellence for careers and employability. And some of the questions that we're most focused on are some of those questions that we've already been thinking about today. How can we best enable young people to prepare for an extraordinary and exciting future that they're also going to be shaping, as well as helping them to enter safely, securely and successfully? So this particular panel session today, I think is really, really interesting because we have three expert speakers to discuss the increasing role that I think online platforms and digital education are going to play in transforming the options available to students. I myself am currently studying for an online postgraduate qualification, so I'm living this dream and this experience. But historically, higher education hasn't necessarily been as agile as it needed to be to move through into this new space. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Liz Wilkinson, who is now a senior career consultant in the Careers Group, who works with our University of London worldwide distance learning students. And Liz was formerly the head of careers for Royal Holloway. We're also joined today by Olivier Witorski, who is the Vice President of Partnerships for France and French-speaking countries for Future Learn, which is a platform I know many of you will be welcome and know well. And then Serge Rave, who is President of the Reconnaître Open Recognition Alliance. So we've got three expert speakers bringing very different perspectives. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Liz to begin our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Kate. So welcome, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I come to this dialogue as the perspective of the careers employability expert, focusing on how portfolio education and microcredentials can help individuals achieve satisfying and sustainable careers in this VUCA environment. I also come at this from the perspective of someone who is developing scalable microcredentials, which are time effective, self-directed, but also accredited by an institution that people can wrap those in with their core subject studies. So that's my perspective. Oops. So what we've seen in past decades is a real shift in what is required for individuals to navigate sustainable and satisfying careers. Back in 1978, Johnston articulated that it wasn't enough to have core deep expertise in a subject, but that to have a successful career, we needed to be T-shaped, that we needed to have not only that core expertise, but also the broader skills. And what we've all seen in the past decade is that T-shaped skills are not enough. So we've seen the shift in employability provision from that broadening of your core degree expertise to actually encouraging people to be more flexible and multifaceted. The key question is that we have stopped just comparing ourselves with other human beings, but that we are actually comparing and worrying about how do we differentiate ourselves from robots and artificial intelligence? How do we make sure that we're not in a job that's going to be automated? And how do we add value to robots? It's an existential question, and I think microcredentials provide some of the answer. So one way of looking at individuals is in their career stages. The focus of this dialogue is about youth. And in fact, the definition of youth is itself also changing. Drawing on the work of Grattan and Scott in 2016 and their work on the 100-year life, youth as life Duration extends, youth extends. So I'm taking here as a definition of youth, 18 to 30. A 12-year period when much can change in terms of career circumstances, career attitudes, and also career stages. One useful framework to look at individual career learners is that of career stages, and saying, are people defining themselves as career starters, career developers, and career changers? And we see all those three stages in the 18 to 13 cohort. The VUCA environment is accelerating career progression. It's also accelerating career pivoting and change, both, sort changes and changes in relation to setbacks. But what all those career stages have in common is they are all very short of time, and they all have a need for continual career agility. And this is, I think, where microcredentials, which by their very definition are small, they are time efficient, they are often flexibly delivered and can often be studied asynchronously and at the convenience of the student. They are bite-sized chunks. I know Olivier is going to say more of that, so I won't transgress on his territory. But they, to develop agility, then a flexible tool is very helpful, particularly as career paths move away from the assumption of a stable stairway, where you are assuming predictable ascent, to what many of our students describe to us, that they've experienced their career path as stepping stones through a marsh. And so, therefore, as those different career stages look at, how do I signal my motivation for a career changer? How do I differentiate, supplement, and enhance my core expertise? The question perhaps from a career starter. I worked recently with an art history student who was micro-credentialing in economics to equip themselves for a career in the commercial art world. This flexibility of micro-credentials is very attractive to our students. And also we can deliver career management skills and direct career learning through micro-credentials. This is something that we have pioneered at the University of London. This is our recently launched career planning micromodule. And you can see here the messaging from employers about self-management and self-leadership, but also the response from the student that this structured micro program takes about 20 hours. But also the credentialing, that approach helps soothe what they call their existential dreads. And there's a lot of existential dread as people look at a very uncertain VUCA world. So whoever we are, individuals or institutions, we need to mutate for the new environment that we are going to need to continually reinvent. It's never been easier to access online learning in bite-sized chunks wherever you are. And students will continue to equip themselves through micro-credentials. But if we work with them and use the rigor and credibility of our higher educational institutions and these modern methodologies, then we work with them to co-create and equip them with powerful tools that help them mutate and continue to mutate lifelong for this new VUCA environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. That was a great start. And now I think we're going to move on to Olivier.
Thank you. Just move. So hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and to be sharing some of our observations on the rise of microcredentials. So I just wanted to give a quick reminder of what we mean by microcredentials. There are, of course, multiple definitions, and I think there is definitely a need for clarification and standardization. But in a nutshell, these are micro-qualifications that basically demonstrate skills, knowledge, and or experience in a given subject, and they provide academic and credit or professional recognition. So We are currently facing a changing job market and a changing higher education landscape, and they are both actually leading to the rise of microcredentials. The World Economic Forum expects that in 2025, 85 million jobs are going to be disrupted, and 97 million jobs are going to emerge due to technology advances. So we are talking automation, we are talking AI, we are talking embedded analytics into business processes, we are talking about remote work as well. And so generally, there will be a change in the labor division between humans and machines that is disturbing the market. The COVID-19 sanitary situation has basically accelerated the skills gap and the need for more education. According to the International Labour Organization, 114 million people have lost their job. And so a lot of those people will need more education. They will need to get back to the workforce. They will need it quickly. They will need it at low cost and on subjects, of course, that are relevant to the job market. But lifelong learning is key, as Liz just said, and it will be key. The foundation of Young Australians, for example, they project that young people today, when they are 15 years old, they will probably have 17 jobs over 5 different careers during their lifetime. This is a very, very different market from what we had previously. And so, of course, the higher education sector is evolving to cater to this new state of affairs. On the other side, when we talk about students, for example, there was a Pearson survey that was done in 2019, and they revealed that there was a declining confidence in the relevance of traditional degrees for the job market. Many students are adopting a do-it-yourself type of approach. I mean, if we think about it, certain employers like Google, for example, don't require a degree for positions that they have. And they're even creating their own certificates. So it's completely disrupting the sort of traditional degree pathways. If we look at many countries across the world, abandon rates are very, very high. And so that leaves students without any credits or any type of reward to their financial and time investments. And even when actually education is free, for example, the cost of life is quite significant for many students. So I think we need to find a way to reward them for the time they spend. And lastly, many around the world feel that education somehow isn't working for them. It's out of reach. And it's failing their generation. They feel that it's not preparing them to work. It's very costly. And actually, there is an increasing perception that you can do okay without a degree. So how do microcredentials respond to the changing patterns? The first thing is that they are accessible. Like Lee said, they can be taken online. So they are accessible from home or from different places across the world. Like I said, they are global. Microcredentials can be taken from any country all over the world, whether you're in Mumbai or Melbourne, for example. They are very fast. You can actually obtain a professional or an academic credit in a matter of weeks or months. And that's going to help a lot employability. And that's going to bring agility to the job market. And lastly, they are specialized. They are going to help training people in specific skills that are actually needed for the job market. So what are the opportunities for the higher education system? I think in short, for me, this must be the greatest opportunity ever facing the higher education sector to rethink their audiences, domestic, international, young students, employed students, lifelong learners, and to actually offer a range of formats, length, prices that will basically respond to all those needs. They will need to rethink the learning journeys and enable to stack credentials and work towards a degree, but not leaving people without any credentials if they can't do 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. They'll need to rethink their relationship with government and employers and their role as the hub of the knowledge economy, and how do they connect with those stakeholders. And they can actually become truly global. I think countries such as France and the UK have actually so much to offer on a global scale. And that's the opportunity to become truly global outside of their traditional degree. So of course, the the micro-credential market is still not mature. It's quite an emerging market. But I think there is a lot of opportunity for the future for many higher education institutions. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. That was fascinating. And now on to Serge.
Yes, so let's move to... Yes, so thank you very much for inviting me to have a chance to explain the wonderful world of open recognition. I've been working in the field of learning technologies for over 20 years now, many international projects, and one of my most recent work is about recognition. So a few words about what I'm going to speak about is open badges, because open badges are linked to micro-credentials, and I would like to explain in what relationship. Also, the difference between recognition and certification. And I would like to express the idea of we need to redefine what is a learning and recognition pathways, because they go together. Learning doesn't go without any form of recognition, and the way we recognize has an impact on the way we learn. So why open badges? Open badges were designed because over 90% of our learning is not visible. And so that was why open badges were created, to make all learning visible. And what we have seen with open badges is not only they make learning visible, but they also make informal recognition visible. So it's not learning just which is visible, but also recognition which is made visible through badges. And that is a very important point to take into consideration. Oops, it went a bit too far. Yes. So what is the relationship between open badges and micro-credentials? Open badges, they cover the whole spectrum of recognition practices. They are what we call a type of verifiable claim. And this claim can be micro or macro. Yeah? The thing also about open badges is that they are actionable. They're allowed to be endorsed, to be updated. They can be used also as identification in a system we call attribute-based access control. For example, if you have a badge, it will open a door. It will create a community where people will be able to communicate, and also you can have associated services created by badges. So the idea that you have a token which is actionable, you can do something with it. It's not just the transcription on a digital support of something that would be on paper. And open badges have led to the emergence of what we can call open credentials. And this is where I would like to situate the discussion about open badges and micro-credentials. Here is what we call the space of recognition, with two axes, formal, informal, more centered to institution of the community, and traditional, non-traditional. Typically, a diploma is printed on paper, you put it on the wall, and the only transformation it will capture over years will be becoming yellow if it is on an acidic paper. But imagine on the right corner, you have something that could be like a Tamagotchi. Imagine a credential that you would have to feed in order to keep it alive. And this is something which is possible, for example, with open badges, because with open badges, when you capture endorsement that keep the badge alive, you can add new evidence to your badge, and so you have a lively credential. And so basically, micro-credentials tend to be on the bottom left corner of this space, while open badges cover the whole spectrum. In education, we have the tendency to think that recognition comes at the end. You learn through a program, and at the end, you are being recognized with a diploma. But you could imagine that you are 14, you want to become a doctor, and you ask for the doctor badge, and you use that badge as a way to construct your identity. And you go and see Médecins Sans Frontières. And so what is very important is to make the difference, and it is often very confusing in the space of formal education, between recognition and validation. Consider that recognition is what people want, and that validation is ancillary to recognition. This is one possible form of recognition. And validation is a cherry on the cake. Recognition is the cake, validation, certification is the cherry on the cake. And we all know and like many cakes that don't have cherries. So what is important if we want to develop an open society, an open world, an open market, open job market, is really to promote this idea of recognition. And this is where I would like to stop with this image, what I call the breadth of recognition. It should be an animation. I don't understand why it's not working. But basically, the idea is that recognition, the combination of recognition, knowledge, and aspirations is what make people move. And recognition is a way to help people to move forward. And I think this is one of the elements that needs to evolve in higher education. I think there is one slide that has been missing. This is this one, yes. This is the representation I would like to submit to the discussion. It's basically an individual starts with aspiration. And aspiration can lead you to choose a diploma or to engage into practices. And practices tend to be interdisciplinary. And then communities of practice recognize these practices, and they can define what we call open credentials that could link to CRI in Paris, the Centre pour Recherche Interdisciplinaire, François Tadei, is suggesting the idea of blank diploma. That is basically that students should be able to create their own diploma, and the role of the institution wouldn't be to check, to have a checklist to check, what you have done checks all the boxes of the existing diploma, but basically check that the diploma that you have created based on the credentials you have collected through your practices is at level 5, 6, 7, or 8 of the European qualification framework. So what is interesting in that process is the institution recognizes and validates a diploma that has been created by the student. At the same time, the institution learns. Because of course, the curriculum that was developed 5 or 10 years ago is probably obsolete. And in this process of recognition, it is an opportunity for the institution to learn through the validation process of blank diplomas. So this is the future we imagine at Reconnaître Open Recognition Alliance.
Thank you so much, Serge. Very inspiring. So we've had some really interesting and stimulating suggestions about some changes that we will want to consider in our structure, in our operation, even in our understanding of what learning is. So I'd like to, first of all, encourage attendees to post some questions in the chat. We can have those and we can share those with the panelists and ask them to respond. But I wanted to kick off by asking each of our 3 panelists. I've got so many questions here, but I'm going to pick one which I referred to earlier about agility, which is that I think higher education as a sort of organizational sector has not necessarily been terribly agile about adopting change, and cycles of change tend to be quite slow, although even in the last 12 months we've seen quite a lot of change. So I wonder what each of the panelists think might be one key change that universities might need to make either to their structures or to the way that they operate that would enable them to become more receptive to the kinds of portfolio reconstruction that we've been hearing about so far this morning. So what one change would enable institutions to become more receptive to portfolio reconstruction? And I'll go back through the panel in order. Liz, and then Olivier, then Serge. Liz.
So thank you, Kate. So I think my response would be that what we are seeing with career learners is that they are going outside of their higher education institutions in order to supplement their core expertise. So I think that I would encourage higher educations to create more micro-credential options internally. Given a choice, student will often prefer to have a coherency and the reassurance that their micro-credentials are endorsed by their home institution. But if you do not provide them, they will acquire them from elsewhere. So I think that perhaps a more agile subunit in higher education that can experiment more with micro-credentials, build them fast, pilot them, adapt them, parallel to the most slower processes for core degree provision.
Thank you, Liz. Olivier. Olivier. Serge, we'll have Serge instead. We have lost Olivier momentarily. Serge, what's your thought on what one kind of key development or key change universities might need to make to help them be more receptive to portfolio approaches?
I think it would be to work with the real world, to work with the world of work. If you think IBM, for example, has issued more 3 million badges last August, I think. They were working with Northeastern University in order to have the badges created by IBM to be recognized towards academic degrees by Northeastern University. I think they stopped for some kind of administrative rationale. But I think that would be one way to look at it. Basically, not to look at the university as a sole provider of learning, but also as a provider of recognition and validation, and to work in cooperation with the real world.
I think universities may struggle with that sense that they need to have a shift in cultural identity and a sense of themselves. Olivier, have you rejoined us?
I have, yeah.
Thank you. Welcome back.
I do totally agree. I think the key thing for me is that they have to challenge themselves. They have to rethink the way they do things, and challenging yourself when you actually have done certain things in a certain way for like so long. It's a difficult switch in mindset. However, some are doing it. I can see, for example, from a FutureLearn perspective, we have micro-credentials between the Open University and Cisco, for example, or Coventry University and Amazon AWS, or l'Institut Français de la Mode and Caring. And I think, trying to bridge the gap, like Serge said, between education and the world of work is key to success. But there is a need for a desire to change, to rethink, and to be not starting with a blank page, but to be able to change the way things are done internally.
There might be an irony there, I think, in that we expect students to become very agile and change their approaches to things, while perhaps sometimes the institutions that they learn in are not practicing some of those behaviours. So we've got some questions coming in. Andy has asked if anybody would like to share their experience of introducing digital badges in the complex bureaucratic HEI framework. I think that's exactly what we've been talking about. If any of the panelists would like to share perhaps a problem that they faced and how they've overcome perhaps some of those bureaucratic challenges. Serge, Olivier, perhaps?
I would say that today open badges are used in higher education more like an add-on and a very traditional way of building recognition. So what would be a real change would be to use this option to help students to create their own diploma. So the only solution you can create interdisciplinary diploma is by giving control to the students. It would be very difficult for university to create interdisciplinary diploma. It happens here and there, but study the way universities are structured in France through NRS is through disciplines. It's through disciplines that you get a career, not through interdisciplinary practice. So yes, it is an opportunity, but it needs to change the approach, that we don't just recognize a diploma that has been achieved at the end of a curriculum, a predefined curriculum, but to adopt an approach of an open curriculum and let the students build their curriculum. And of course, not let them do it alone and support them. Yes, start with the idea that every qualification should have some kind of interdisciplinary flavor.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Olivier, Liz, would either of you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Serge. I think it's going to be a more a la carte education where students can stack micro-credentials towards a degree. And of course, students will have more ownership over their own education, and we'll see more bridges between disciplines. I mean, already some of the higher education institutions are creating those bridges already within programs, for example. But like you said, I don't think degrees are just going to be a collection of credits and stackable micro-credentials. It will only happen when there is validation by an institution, and and like you said, to provide a respective level of qualifications. But to me, for example, the key thing as well is, again, switching the mindset. Some of the learning pathways are going to be so different from what we've seen until now. And it could be, I don't know, mixing psychology and fashion and marketing, for example, things that we're not providing right now. And so that's very important as well to be understanding those new pathways and how we can kind of enlarge those cross-disciplinary approaches.
Liz, I wonder if I might ask you to come in on the careers education implications of that, because both Serge and Olivier have alluded to student choice. But Colleen has asked, I think, a really important question about how we enable learners to create that, given that they're all starting at different levels. They're probably from very different educational backgrounds and different educational cultures. So I wondered, and this was a question I had myself, which is, how do we support students to curate effectively, whether inside a university or outside?
So thank you for that. I think that the key point here is co-creating with students. And if I can also bring in Tim's comment about parallel quality assurance mechanisms, what I think we need is proportionate learning creation structures and quality assurance. So I think we make it much more accessible if we get students involved in the design from the start. And use our student voice and advocacy networks to say, what do you want micro-credentials in? What's important to you? Within an employability context, we would also want the voice of the employers in there. So I think it's how we design them. We can design them much more in a sort of beta testing way. If your assessment is more about pass-fail certification rather than a grade, then that gives you a little bit more flexibility to be more adventurous in trying things, monitoring people's usage, adapting them, as the main point made, noticing what students are using them, seeing what your reach and impact in. And the learning analytics that online learning allows us gives us much more data on that. So I think that we've got a lot of lessons that we can learn from the software industry in sort of, get it as someone said to me, minimal viable product, and then improve. And as part of that improvement, continually bring in the student view and the student voice, so that the credential, you don't build it and then leave it there. You build it, and likewise, you continue to evolve it.
Serge, Olivier, would you like to come back in on that point? And then I have one more question I'd like to talk about inclusion.
That's a very interesting point, because I think already in the United States, for example, it's already happening. And for example, if people are actually students are doing it on their own. I mean, universities, of course, in the States are creating micro-credentials, and the market is quite confusing there, I think, at the moment. But you already have basically students that are taking online micro-credentials or certificates or different things to actually stack it together to make a degree or to make a resume, a profile that is different. And what I'm trying to say here is that they are going to do it whether we like it or not. When we're doing surveys, for example, on employers, they see more and more people coming to them during a recruitment process, for example, with profiles where they have their traditional degrees and they have a lot of different things around, add-ons of learning, for example, and that's how they kind of differentiate themselves on the market. But all those learnings are creating a profile for the students. But whether we like it or not, they are going to do it. So it's better for us as the higher education institutions to be actually structuring that thing together. But employers are starting to recognize more and more when they say, I have two different profiles that are equally qualified, for example, that online learning or those kind of add-ons are going to make the difference for us.
Serge, any thoughts on that? Thank you, Olivier.
Yes. The thing is, it would be a mistake to imagine that an accumulation of micro-credential could create a diploma. Not by itself, because micro-credentials can have a sense in relation to a practice. And the same micro-credentials could have a completely different meaning if they are exploited within a different practice. So I think it would be very important for universities to be observing what's happening in the real world. What are the emerging practices? And also maybe to lead students to invent new practices. Microcredentials are not practices. They can be totally meaningless. They have a title, but as long as they are not embodied within a body of practice, then that's nothing. It's just a microcredential. So practices. That would be my motto for education, just like there is location for real estate. So what kind of practices we want people to acquire, develop, and that is a practice that is meaningful. The microcredential is not very meaningful by itself, unless it is connected to a professional practice.
Thank you. Kim, do we have time for one last question? I'm aware that we're maybe getting tight for time. We might have time for one last.
Yes, we do.
We do, right. In which case, I want to come in on this really important question that Tracy has asked about inclusion. She said, is there a potential that these forms of portfolio reconstruction can further exclude certain groups? So obviously, digital poverty is a huge factor at the moment in the UK. Many school-age students have not been able to get online. And some questions about the applicability of open access in areas in the Global South where the way in which learners interact and use the internet is vastly different to the North. So is there a potential that we can be perhaps excluding certain groups through these kinds of portfolio reconstruction, and how can we think about supporting these groups? Olivier, perhaps to start with you.
Very tricky question to answer, but at the same time, for example, so I get the point of like digital exclusion, and I think that's a bigger question than just the higher education sector. I think it needs to happen on a bigger scale. At the same time, for example, from a future learning perspective, we see a lot of people coming from different backgrounds and not necessarily strong economic background that are still building their own things, building their own learning pathways, and using online as well as a way to learn, because they can't actually go to university, for example. So I guess it's a tricky balance to find. But I think that the question of digital exclusion is just bigger than higher education.
Sure, of course. Of course, absolutely. Anybody else like to come back in on that?
Can I chip in?
Please do, Liz.
So my perspective of asynchronous online learning, which is often microcredentials, is that it is often more inclusive. That as long as it is mobile phone friendly, the mobile phone is the technology of the Global South, then actually it enables people who are also having to work at the same time, or who have heavy caring responsibilities, or who have challenges from disability. They find it easier to access time-effective, flexible learning than they do some of the time assumptions around higher education. Higher education has traditionally been very profligate with student time and doesn't design its programs to say, how can we make this fast to learn? If you also have to work a full-time job to support your family, you are often excluded, therefore, from higher education. So I think, the digital poverty is something, of course, we have to be alert with and look at the way we use things like bandwidth. So we have to design it to be resource light. But I do think it is a great tool for extending the reach of education.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. Serge?
I don't have an answer to that question. I think technology can be an enabler and a disabler. So like open badges can be an enabler and a disabler. So what is the solution? I think one solution is really to start by the process of recognition is my opinion, the most important element, because people that we name as non-qualified, in fact, are not being recognized. A lot of school dropouts, why do they drop out of school? It's because they're not being recognized, and they are not recognized after they have dropped out of school. So I think one of the great problems we have in our society is a problem of recognition. And so recognition technology can help with that, and that's why we have badges. But badges just make visible things that were not visible before. So I think if there is an effort to be made, it's not just to ask people to align to an existing standard, but to recognize where the people are. And for example, in France, we have this a project with différents et compétents, which is people with disabilities learning. And there is a new program of recognition called validation des acquis, reconnaissance des acquis de l'expérience, where there is zero failure. Why zero failure? Because you only assess a person on what the person is good at. And I think it is very important, because in the systems we have in education, we tend to have a deficit model where you are defined by what you don't know. And I think to change this mentality would be very important if we want to create a more inclusive society. It's not just a question of technology, it's a question of mindset.
And that's been a recurring theme, I think, hasn't it, throughout many of the comments that we've heard this morning. So we're going to wrap up very shortly. I'd like each of the panelists to tell me one thing that they're very excited about in the prospect of what might be coming in reconstructing this kind of educational approach. Liz, one thing you're very excited about?
The opportunity to co-create content with students, so they create the education as well as consume it. Fantastic.
Olivier?
For me, it's the ability to actually mix different disciplines and create profiles that don't exist at the moment.
Fantastic. And Serge?
Well, the idea of education as emancipatory.
Fantastic. What a brilliant representation of the different perspectives and experience that our panelists have brought this morning. I hope you've been as inspired as I have been by listening to these ideas and thinking about what's possible in our own environments and our own institutions. Thank you all very much for joining us. And as Kim has put in the chat, if you'd like to join the wrap up and conclusion session, do just click on the link there. Thank you all very much.